tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So friends, as most of you probably know, this weekend, is the weekend of the Easter, which is, of course, a Christian sort of holiday. But there's an interesting or an analogy, a comparison that might be made between the symbolism of Easter and the practice of the Dhamma. Now, according to the meaning of Easter, or actually, there was Good Friday on Friday, which is symbolic of the day that Jesus Christ was crucified. And then there was a day in between, and then Easter Sunday, the resurrection of Christ in the new birth, or the resurrection anyway. So it's symbolic of dying to the old and then arising in a new light, so to speak. And going on a retreat, you could say, is a similar type of process. For example, we started the retreat on Friday evening, last evening. And so basically coming here to the retreat center, you're leaving the past behind, at least temporarily, physically, and undergoing the process of cultivating mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, although of course a short weekend retreat is quite short for developing that to any degree. But so as you left your home life behind and then come to practice meditation, and then the mind starts, going into, or trying to, let's say, get reconnected, grounded to the present moment, kind of letting go of the past, letting go of the future. And so that process takes some time. And then eventually, if one is, the right conditions are met, then the mind might become concentrated and aware, and then the arising of insights, or the transformation of our ego-bound consciousness into the light of wisdom, or the present moment awareness. And that one's mind then gets a glimpse of the Dhamma, or the light of the Dhamma, and begins a new type of life, or transformations can be acquired or come about in that period of time. Again, maybe not so much in weekend retreat, but so I just wanted to mention that kind of comparison or analogy of that idea about Easter, and that in our practice of meditation, again, we're trying to let go of our old habits and see our negative habits or repetitive habits that keep our mind kind of just going around in circles with the desires, aversions, worry, fears, anxieties, stress. We keep on regenerating our various types of moods and mental states and emotions, and gradually, trying to to transform them, or to basically to die to those old, especially the negative patterns in the mind that are not so useful and that keep on sapping our strength and energy. So, that's one of the main aspects of the practice of the Dhamma, is, the training of mindfulness, to be able to be aware of our intentions and impulses, to think and act and speak in the ways that we've been accumulating much of our life, and also in our unskillful actions, such as living out of harmony with the precepts and other types of unwholesome speech and actions that it's very easy to be caught up in, especially in this kind of society in which we're brought up as a young person and learn all these various types of habits and idiosyncrasies and so on that the general population has, but then it's very hard to let go of them. So the practice of Dhamma is about learning how to gradually let go of that and not to have fear about it. A lot of people cling on to the past because they're sort of afraid of the unknown. And the past is familiar. Even though it's painful, a lot of people keep holding on to the past and just resolve themselves to, well, that's my lot, and I'll just have to suffer that way until the end, rather than wanting to put forth the effort and energy to change. So it's easier just to go with the flow of the past rather than to want to really change one's mind, especially the mind. So, probably in your practice of meditation this morning, you might have seen, the mind's stubborn, wanting to cling to its old habits, because our habits are not easy to overcome. And that's why in the Buddhist teaching, the Dhamma teachings are centered on the Four Noble Truths. The truth of the suffering and the cause of suffering. But even more importantly, that suffering can be brought to an end, and then how to actually do that. How to actually live, think, and meditate. It will help us to die to the past, especially those negative old habits that are no longer useful, and to be reawakened in another quality or dimension of awareness, and especially the present moment, awareness. And so essentially the practice of meditation is about dying to the past, which you cannot recreate, and also dying to the future, that the future is also just a thought in the mind. To be able to experience the freedom of the present moment. So, the practice of meditation, and especially the way the Buddha taught it in the Sutra of the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, is using the body as a starting point for reconnecting with the truth in the present moment. That's already the natural condition of our consciousness. And this goes back to even the time when we were born. That the mind's natural state is a state of present moment awareness. And it's connected to the body. The mind and body were born together, as I mentioned so many times, but it's very important to remember that. And especially the evolution, how our consciousness has evolved into to be caught and trapped in the tug of war between the past and the future, tug of war between seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, that basically we've self-created because we haven't understood the process. And this is really the crux or the essence of the Dhamma practice. And it lies right within this body with its feelings, perceptions, and consciousness. So at the time of conception, the consciousness came together with the body, and for 9 months in the womb, this consciousness was being infused in the whole body with each cellular division, if you understand anything about biology. So from a one-cell organism, in 9 months, this marvelous human organism grew and developed into a multi-billion cell organism. And during that time, that awareness was basically just in the present moment, in direct contact with that tremendous energy of evolution that was going on in that formation of this, wonderful body, the most complex physical organism that we know of as of yet. So anyway, with all of its marvelous interconnected systems of respiration, metabolism, and immune system, and the body is self-regulating, and it has natural wisdom. Because this amazing human body was, arose or developed through natural wisdom that was within the cells and awareness itself. No computer was causing the body to be made, or doctors or anybody else, because it has natural wisdom. But at the time of birth, and the baby comes out of the womb and gets, the doctor cuts the umbilical cord, that little baby becomes separate, basically, from the present moment. But the consciousness of a baby is what is called oceanic awareness. It means, all of you know, especially your mothers, the baby comes out and the eyes are just, there's just seeing all these things, but there's no discrimination in it. There's no even any sense of I or me or other. But it quickly loses that. And so, the mind was connected to the body and the present moment. But then you give the baby a name and start calling it its name, and then gradually it starts looking when you call the name. And people come over and pay it attention, give it things, hug it, gucci gucci goo, all this attention. So what used to be a very expanded oceanic awareness without any central focal point, gradually a little nucleus of an I or a me starts to coagulate sort of behind the eyes and gets sort of centered there. And this idea that me is something inside that's looking now at things outside. And everything from the skin inwards is me, and from the outer skin outwards as the other world. So that's been created. Actually, that process is created within the consciousness. And then, the sweet achi or grandmother comes and gives the baby a sweet. Then it tastes that pleasurable feeling of a sweet, a chocolate. And then there's that desire to have that pleasurable feeling comes. And it starts to associate the face of the grandmother with the pleasurable feeling. And then it starts to hope that that face comes again, expecting the pleasurable feeling to come with it. So that certain object, that face, is identified as a source of pleasurable feeling. And in the same way, maybe the grandfather or an uncle holds the baby too tightly and causes it some pain, or maybe doesn't give it anything. And the baby starts to, associate, this face is useless, or this face brings pain, and hoping that face doesn't come in the future. So that's the birth of the past and future, is created in the mind at that time. Hoping the future to be pleasurable feelings will come to it, and that the painful feelings will stay away. And the mind therefore starts to get caught in this tug of war between pleasure and pain. And because of the pain, it seeks more pleasure. Because of the painful feelings, the more you identify this pain happening to me, the mind then wants to create more situations where more pleasure will come to it as a way of escaping the painful feelings. Whether they're painful physical feelings or painful psychological feelings. So like if you have a disturbing thought, you might try to create some sensual fantasy that you can escape into temporarily to get away from some unpleasurable thoughts. Or, people are facing physical pain, they take some drugs, of course, or something else to try to eliminate that, or to take these kind of drugs that create euphoria and happiness or pleasure. Anyway, so little by little that process starts growing, and the baby loses that natural connection to the present moment as it gets focused in the external world. And basically all problems are problems of the past and future. try to think of any problem that you may have and see if it's not connected with the past or future. Wanting something in the future, or the fear of not getting that thing in the future, or remembering the pain of the past and not wanting to get that pain back again. So it takes one away from that present moment. But when the mind is resting in the present moment, there's nothing to judge, nothing to compare. And so that's a natural state of contentment. That's a natural state of, you could say, happiness. When the mind is resting in its natural condition of the present moment. But we've lost that connection. And as people, the baby grows up, it gets further and further and further away from the natural present moment and of the body. And that's really the beginning of suffering, because we become alienated from our own bodies, and therefore of the natural wisdom that's there within the body and the present moment awareness. So the whole practice of the Dhamma really is about how to reconnect with that natural wisdom and reconnect to the present moment to overcome all the sufferings and problems that are there because of that strong attachment to the past and future. And not even realizing that happiness is already there in ourself. Literally just beneath the nose, the present moment awareness. So how to reconnect with that? And that's why the Buddha taught the teachings of the four foundations of mindfulness is the practice of developing mindfulness, concentration, and awareness, or the path leading back to the end of suffering. The path leading back to the present moment awareness, and in that the identification with past and future gets left behind, and therefore all the worries and anxieties and greed and hatred connected with the past and future get gradually left behind, and the mind is reawakened in that present moment awareness. Some people even might, call that a rebirth, or kind of a resurrection from the ignorance into the light of awareness and wisdom. So that's why the Buddha chose the first foundation of mindfulness is the mindfulness of the body. And he chose that because the body is the shell for this mind. And the Buddha summed up the practice of the Dhamma in 2 verses of the Dhammapada. Basically state that all actions are led by the mind. Mind is the master, mind is the maker. Act or speak with an impure mind, then suffering will follow, as the cartwheel follows the foot of the ox. And in the same way, if one acts or speaks with a pure state of mind, then happiness will follow, as your shadow follows you around. So that basically, the mind is the creator of everything. And, both suffering and happiness are there within the mind. And the suffering and happiness is based on our states of mind and the actions that are associated with that. But How do we reach the mind? That's the problem. And the Buddha, in his great wisdom, saw that the body is the natural stepping stone for reaching the mind, because this body is the home for the mind. And in another powerful stanza, the Buddha said that the world, the arising of the world, the ceasing of the world, and the path leading to the ceasing of the world is right within this 5 or 6 foot body, again with its sensations, perceptions, and consciousness. So that's why mindfulness of the body is considered to be the starting point. Because the body, again, is always in the present moment. And we carry it around with us all the time. It weighs 50 kilos, 60, 70, 80, 100 or more kilos of flesh and bones. I mean, that's a heavy weight. And it's sort of in your face. It's there all the time. So why can't people notice it? We're carrying such a heavy weight with us all the time, but yet probably only 10% of the time are we even aware of we have a body. Because most of the other 90% of the time, except when you get a toothache or stub your toe or you get a black eye or something, you're brought back to the body for a moment, but then the mind escapes into the past or future again, and totally oblivious that you even have a body. So and again, that's why the mind is so caught up in the past and future, because it's lost that natural connection with the body in the present moment. So that's why just remembering, as we are suggesting this morning, in the practice of just remembering what the body is doing at any moment. In fact, the word mindfulness comes from to remember. Sati means recollection, to remember the present moment. And of what the body is doing and what the mind is doing. Usually we see those two as separate things, but actually the body and mind are not really separated. They're intricately connected. And the body affects the mind affects the body. But it's easier to feel the body as to be able to directly observe your thoughts, because the mind is operating at a much faster speed. So how many of you in your meditation this morning got lost in the thoughts? Just raise your hand if you got lost in your thoughts. So why did you get lost in your thoughts? Ever think about it? Why did you get lost in your thoughts? Of course, you could say many reasons, but it comes down to you didn't see them coming. Right? Weren't you trying to just count your breaths or feel your breathing or feel your sitting body? But then before you knew it, you didn't even see them. You were lost in a train of thought, right? That's because you weren't attentive to the body. You weren't grounded in the nervous system. Because most of our thoughts and impulses are generated from body sensations. Let's say you get a pain, a physical pain. Then the idea comes into the mind, I want to move to get rid of the physical pain. So, that idea to move came from a physical sensation. Or remembering a pleasurable feeling, the desire to want to recreate that pleasurable feeling again in the future. But they all start from feelings and sensations. That's why the second foundation of mindfulness is the mindfulness of feelings, pleasurable and painful and neutral feelings that we have coming through the senses. But in order to observe those, you have to be centered in the body, really. Because again, most of them are generated by physical sensations. Even if it's just a pleasurable smell. Maybe you're sitting there, meditating, getting calm, but then a certain odor comes across. Maybe somebody lets some bad air out the backside. And some odor comes by and you see some reaction. And then you imagine or perceive what that smell is. And then the aversion to get rid of it, or in case of a pleasurable feeling, like maybe a smell coming from the kitchen, and the desire to think about that food and anticipating, to get that food in the future. But it's triggered off by, that sensation. And then that triggers off our thoughts. And then that triggers off the actual physical actions that we take to either get something we want or to get away from something that we don't want. So the four foundations of mindfulness is a gradual, each one of those is a stepping stone for the next one. So the first stage of meditation is to get grounded and centered and concentrated in the body or on the breathing. Either the breathing or the body or a combination of both of them works equally as well. But the main thing is our mind is resting in the present moment. Even just simple remembering of sitting, breathing. If one could do that, for as little as 10 minutes, without any interrupting types of thoughts or without any sleepiness or any of those three obstacles taking over your mind, it's possible you could even get enlightened, or at least to experience a radical transformation of consciousness or awareness. So why is it so difficult to do that? This body is such a heavy weight. Why can't we just be contented with feeling the blood pulsing in our arteries, or our heartbeat, or the other little pleasant sensations you can experience? The mind is always seeking for greater happiness. And if it can't find that happiness within, it naturally seeks for it from the outside. And that's why people are always trying to do things to be happy. In fact, the Buddha's Four Noble Truths are based around where the Buddha mentions suffering 4 times. The truth of suffering, the truth of the arising of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So in that formula, he didn't mention happiness directly. Indirectly he did, he mentioned the end of suffering. But a lot of people hear the Buddha's teaching about suffering and the cause of suffering and say, wait, that's all I want. It's too negative. And they don't wait to hear the good news, the third and the fourth truth. They simply react to the first and second one. Suffering, the cause of suffering. They say, I don't want to hear about that. I want to hear about happiness and the cause of happiness. But even if I told you what happiness was and the cause of happiness, if you're not aware of suffering and the cause of suffering, you're never going to attain that happiness. Because whatever you do to try to achieve some kind of happiness, if you haven't removed the cause of suffering, it's always going to come back. That's why people can take drugs, they can do lots of things to get happy temporarily, or amuse yourself in sensual pleasures and so on, and to get temporarily amused or satisfied, but it's very short-lived. And then the underlying causes of that suffering come back to sort of negate any type of, lasting result of that happiness. And that's why people have to keep repeating it over and over and over again. And how they get addicted to certain types of, sensory pursuits. Because they haven't understood what is the real cause of the suffering. So that's why you shouldn't you shouldn't try to be happy. That all you have to do is understand what is suffering and to remove the cause of suffering, and then you'll automatically be happy. Because happiness is the mind that's resting in the present moment. It's not connected to the past and the future. And it's a state that's always immediately available, essentially, as I've mentioned many times, just beneath your nose. That means, that's just a saying to mean, the present moment is always right here. If we just know how to find it. But it's like a person drowning in the ocean or in a lake, and then calling out for a drink of water. So the person is immersed in the water, but he's calling out to get a drink of water. So it's the same way. People are, already, surrounded by the present moment awareness, but they're, wanting to find some type of pleasurable feeling, away from that. And so it's it's a matter of, again, just learning how to use the body as an anchor to the present moment, because it's such a strong habit that we've not paid attention to that and lost that natural connection. That's why in the practice of mindfulness of the body, what we're doing this morning after sitting, we have you stand up and try not to break that awareness, present moment awareness, bring it into standing. And then the walking. And the reason why I have you, in the walking, and make a clap, and then you just stop and stand. Be able to, go from standing to walking, from walking back to standing, and to understand that the present moment is always right there. And when you get a taste of that, then that helps you a lot to understand that. But that's really the first real type of breakthrough or insight into understanding the nature of our own consciousness, and how easily we get, taken away from that. And so just the fact of remember any time that you're wondering what should I be doing, is just always feel the the feet or the buttocks pressing the ground, and bring your mind back to the present moment. So it's like the anchor of a ship. Most people's lives are like a ship on a stormy sea without a rudder. And so their lives get blown in whatever direction that the wind is blowing. So if the wind is blowing from the east, their life gets blown to the west. If the wind is blowing from the north, their life gets blown to the south, in the other directions, because they don't have an anchor. So the mindfulness of the body serves as that anchor to the present moment. That's always there again. And we carry this body around with us all the time, so we should make the best use of it. To reconnect with that. So, I always come back, and I'm always repeating this essential aspect of it, because that's why the Buddha called the four foundations of mindfulness the direct path. There's many indirect paths of meditation. I mean, you can visualize, floating through a beautiful, scenery of, and all kinds of things, what they call journey meditations, where you visualize yourself doing lots of things, or just chanting a mantra to quieten down the thoughts and enter some kind of mental space. But you always have to come back out of that, come back to the present moment. So, the Buddha called the four foundations of mindfulness the direct path. Maybe not the only path, but the direct one. Because it goes directly it comes directly back to the body. And when you're grounded in the body, you immediately, naturally start feeling sensations. And when you're aware of those sensations, you see the thoughts that are generated and produced by those sensations. And you see the interconnections and the habits, and that you gain that type of understanding and wisdom. That's why it's called the direct path. So, in a retreat like this, in the practice of mindfulness, that's why it's important to try to cultivate the continuity of that attention to the body. And from any posture, going from one posture to the other. And also creating the pauses is very important. A lot of people neglect that or overlook that. It's the pause between going from one action to the other is where the present moment can be experienced. That's why every time we come out of sitting, I just don't say, okay, stand up and do walking, but gradually, step by step, and pausing in every change of posture. And once you get stood up, not immediately start walking. And even to do the walking movement slowly. You can see that when you lift the foot up, to create a little pause, even if it's just a fraction of a second before swinging the foot forward, before putting it down. Or by, when you're going to turn a corner, come to a full stop and pause. And then you can see the intention to want to move. because the body stops, but the mind is still moving. And so that's why by deliberately stopping and pausing, if part of our attention is grounded in the body, then the mind is still moving. That's why we can observe our thoughts. If you're moving quickly, you can't, the body is moving with the mind, so you can't see the mind. But when the body is slowed down and the body stops and the mind keeps moving, then now you can see the desire. Like the desire to do something, but you're stopping. And so the desire becomes stronger. And you can say, oh yes, that's a strong desire. But if we just move with it and never stop and pause, we don't see that, or the anger, or the other emotions, because we're so immediately reacting to them. That's why this practice of mindfulness is such a very powerful type of practice, but people don't always have the right conditions to do that practice, and have enough time and the space where they can slow down and really do the practice without so many other types of distractions. So for those who are staying here, overnight and then tomorrow, even though it's a short retreat, but still the reason why we set it up like that is to have that, the time and the conditions to be able to try to develop that mindfulness of the body and the moment-to-moment mindfulness and stopping and pausing to come back to the present moment. So just when you stop and you come back to just standing. And then you can easily see your thoughts of wanting to go to the future, that urge to want to move quicker, or even the urge to scratch an itch. That's why we advise people not to immediately try to rub and scratch various unpleasant sensations or move the body, because it's very easy not to see your aversion to that. You just keep doing that and you don't realize how much aversion or annoyance that we've accumulated in our mind. But when you pause and you restrain yourself and just observe the sensations, you will see how those sensations change very quickly. And you might have an itch, and normally you might just immediately want to scratch the itch. But instead you be aware of it and you make a note of itchy, and you kind of just watch it. But you see that aversion that's arising because of the itch. You see that desire to lift your arm up. But you try to have patience with that. And then maybe you decide to, you say, to heck with that monk, he's crazy or something, and you say, I'm going to scratch anyway. So you raise up the arm to scratch, and all of a sudden it itches, vanishes. Now there's no need to scratch. So you avoid wasting your energy. So actually the practice of mindfulness is a conservation of energy. Because we waste a lot of energy by reacting to things that don't need reacting to. Reacting to people's speech, or reacting to the various uncomfortable, painful feelings that may come to us, and so many other of the sensory stimulations. So, the practice of mindfulness is a type of ecology. There's a lot of talk about saving energy these days in ecology. in the material world. But what about in our own mental world and in our own body? We waste a lot of energy, especially mental energy. Physical energy is one thing, but mental energy, can even make you more tired. And that's why if you have a lot of sleepiness in meditation, it's probably because your mind is overtaxed and fretting about this or worrying about this and that, or just, generally, stressed out and so on. So it makes you tired. So the mind may get sleepy because of that. But when you learn how to conserve that energy, then it goes into the present moment awareness. That energy is normally directed toward the future, then becomes energy to make the present moment more and more bright and vibrant. It's a direct experience. The present moment isn't just an idea in the mind, it's actually a vibration of awareness, a very subtle vibration of awareness that, normally people don't even know about. But when you tune in and you feel the sensations in the body, that's one of the best ways to reconnect with that vibration of the present moment. Really, it's the vibration of the nervous system. Because all the cells of the body are connected in the nervous system, in what I call the inner internet. And once you start feeling some sensations, like the pulse of blood in your palms or fingers, or the sense of warmth in the palms of the hands, or any other type of sensations, even the touch, the subtle touch of the clothing, the friction against the skin. By specifically paying attention to that, you awaken that sensitivity and start to feel more and more. And that naturally spreads throughout the whole nervous system, because all the cells are connected in that. So there comes a point where you can feel that, just that very ultra subtle kind of vibration, and basically that's the present moment. It's present moment awareness, and it's not that it's not that difficult to really be able to reconnect to that. And that's why I encourage people, and before we meditate often, to do some yoga exercise, and advise them to practice three-part breathing or deep slow breathing, and that also helps to slow down the nervous system, because thoughts and breathing also are related. The quicker you breathe, it shows that there's more agitation in the mind. And the slower you breathe, that has a calming effect on the thoughts. And so by developing deep, slow breathing, that helps to bring the mind more closer to that point of relaxation and the contentment with the present moment. And then in doing the actual exercises, it helps to feel those subtler, basically the cellular vibrations of the body. Because if you're stiff, the joints are stiff, the muscle tissue is stiff, then the body. That's why people don't like to. The body is not much interesting to them. So the mind's not content to just hang out with the body. It wants to think about another person's body, right? So it goes out to think about somebody else's body, because their body doesn't have any good feeling. Maybe it's just pain. And most pain is due to not getting the proper type of exercise and other things, but even just the physical exercise. Electrical energy isn't getting out to charge up the cells of the body. So the interference with the flow of the internal energy is one of the biggest causes of pain. Aches and pains come because the electrical energy is not flowing through the cells and the joints. So there's hardly any feeling. But when you activate that feeling through, doing more regular type of exercise and so on, then when you sit down and meditate, it's not very, it's quite easy to just almost immediately come and reconnect with the cellular vibration, what I call the cellular vibration of the body, because again, it's something that's always there. And then it's very easy to keep the mind in the present moment. So that's all part of that kind of understanding, and why one of my favorite topics is the body-mind connection. And I wrote that little book about how many people, they want to meditate, they sit down, but then immediately they just come up against all these hindrances because they haven't done sort of their homework, so to speak, in terms of understanding the things that make meditation more difficult. So anyway, I think I'll bring this talk to an end, but if anybody has any specific questions about what I was just talking about while it's still fresh in your mind, please you can raise your hand, ask a question. Don't feel shy. Especially those persons who may be not staying overnight tonight. Those who are staying overnight tonight, we have another period in the evening, a questions and answers session. Yes? Yeah.
You teach 30 days meditation. What if our body is according to law of live, constantly in our body? How do we meditate then?
Well, that's why sometimes people have to start on the physical body and find out what are they doing that causes this pain in the body. Because everything has a cause, nothing comes from no reason. And so that's why for some people, if the hindrances are so strong, it becomes very, very, very difficult to meditate. So that's why addressing what we do in our life and trying to make some changes in that as well. So many things affect this body. Our diet affects the body, our exercise affects the body, and even our emotions affect the body. Even our thoughts, fears, worries, anxieties, stress, it can cause physical symptoms, physical pains in the body that we think are physical, but actually they're sources in the mind. Now, neuroscience is agreeing with that as well. Psychosomatic kind of syndromes. So if that's a problem, then that's why it's a holistic. The Dhamma is medicine, and that's why like observing even precepts. By not controlling our body and sort of living out of harmony with the precepts, this causes also so much unnecessary pains in the body. So there's even the precept about not eating in the evening for people on retreats, because overeating can be a cause of pain too, and other types of problems. Or greed for just eating the wrong kinds of food out of attachment for taste or whatever comfort it gives. Okay, it may give some comfort, but then it's also going to have its other reactions. So the Dhamma is really holistic. We have to understand that our body and mind is a kind of a holistic organism, and that everything affects it. The environment, all the things that come through our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, pass through this body just like that and affect the cells and molecules of the body. And then that affects our mind. Yes.
Bhante, one thing I have been trying to understand better is that when we meditate, thoughts come and thoughts disappear. They arise, they exist, and then they disappear. But we're also instructed, as I understand, to do what's called contemplation of various things, the contemplation of feelings, contemplation of different parts of the body, etc. Could you please clarify the distinction between thinking and contemplation?
Well, it depends on, we give our own definitions to words. And so, in fact, if you're familiar with Catholic meditation terminology, contemplation is like what we would call jhana, or without thoughts. Whereas to me, if I say contemplate something, it means thinking about something. I'm contemplate this body. How easy is it? It's impermanent, things that affect us. You think, you contemplate what happened in the past and saw the effects of that, and the ability to sort of analyze. All that is part of what I consider the meaning of contemplation. But for somebody else, like a Catholic monk, contemplation to them might be, wordless, jhanic type of awareness. So it depends on how you're using these words. And so if you're talking to others, that's why there's lots of confusion in the Dhamma world, because if you talk to, let's say somebody from another tradition, they're going to be using words differently. Even the word Dhamma and Dharma, are used differently according to who you're talking to as well. So, therefore, and consciousness and awareness. But usually the contemplation is part of the Satipatthana Sutta. That means the Buddha himself mentions that. One understands how do feelings arise, how do they persist, and how do they cease, and how do they stop coming in the future also. That means it involves some type of analytical understanding or analysis. How does this body come to be? How does greed come to be? Hatred come to be? And how do they persist? And how do they cease? Those are parts of the Satipatthana Sutta. Every part of it, foundation of the body, feelings, mind states, and Dhamma, involves this type of contemplation. Because once we understand something, then you can let go of it. If you haven't understood something, then it keeps then coming back to you. But once you've understood something, then it's more easy to let it go. So that's why the contemplation, after contemplating, the mind can more easily let it go. Once you understand that, oh yeah, an itch is impermanent. Why should I waste my energy scratching an itch? If I wait 10 or 15 seconds, it's going to disappear by itself. So that's an aspect of contemplation. And you realize, oh, yeah. And then when you apply it, you realize, oh yeah, it's true. You know, I resisted that urge to scratch and it disappeared all by itself. And then I became happy that I didn't waste my energy. And you weaken that habit pattern. So the contemplation gives you the energy to apply the right effort, and through the right effort, you get the result of seeing the weakening of the cause of suffering and the arising of more contentment. And then in the end, you can let go of all that other type of contemplation. Because that's the meaning of the term, wisdom will set you free. There's a term, you probably have heard that. Wisdom will set you free. It's when we're in ignorance and we just keep bound up and caught and repeating, going around in circles around over and over and over again, that we remain trapped. So vitakka and vichara are aspects of the first jhana. So vitakka and vichara are applied and sustained thinking. And depending on who you talk to, again, there's some people who say, oh, it doesn't mean thinking. But actually it does mean thinking. But in the second jhana, that the vitakka and vichara is let go of. But not in the first one. But that means the thinking is directed thinking, not scatterbrained thinking that most people have most of the time. Just jumping around from one thing to another, or confused thinking. It's very directed thinking, as I mentioned. And so you become very concentrated in it. Concentration doesn't necessarily mean being without thoughts, because there's different levels and grades of concentration. But the first level of it can include that type of thinking. Any other questions? So those who are staying overnight here, in the evening after the puja, there's going to be another time for questions, but those will be done from written questions. So you can, if you don't want to ask, nobody wrote down any questions. So it means there's no more questions.
What would be the, what would you call putting the body in the mind? And what would that mean?
Putting the body in the mind?
Right. Because I was thinking about the Abhidharma, I thought of the Abhidharma, like the circumstances of Buddha's actually going to the Brahman world with his physical body.
Well, the way I would see it is putting the body in the mind is becoming aware of the body. It means it's an object of your mind. And as I mentioned in the Dhamma talk, it's probably a conservative estimate that people are aware of their body even 20% of the time, because the rest of the time they're lost in the thoughts and totally oblivious to the body for the most part anyway. So putting the body in the mind would mean developing that awareness that has that continuous connection to feeling, at least some parts of the body and the sensations are there. So that would basically mean like mindfulness, having developed a good mindfulness of the body.
Okay. I know you explained it last week about consciousness versus awareness. Can you re-explain it, just to summarize it again?
Well, when we talk about consciousness, it's a very complex subject because consciousness itself is very complex. And I was having this is a question that some meditators brought up today during the interview, was a question about the consciousness, saying, does a single cell of the body have a consciousness, or does an amoeba have a consciousness? Now, the terms consciousness and awareness are often used kind of interchangeably or have similar connotations. I mean, if you're conscious of something, then you could also say you're aware of that. And if you're aware of something, you could also say you're conscious of that. So, in a way, they're used interchangeably. But in terms of our meditation experience, not theoretically, but in actual experience of the consciousness and the shift in fluctuations in that degree of consciousness, then, that's what, in our meditation practice helps to understand those differences, not what may be just written in a book, but in your own actual experience, when you experience that transition from what I call ego consciousness to a more expanded awareness, which doesn't have too much of the I and me and the ego involved in it. It's much more an expansive, sort of like the baby's consciousness that I mentioned in the talk when it's first born. So it's not born with an ego consciousness itself, but you can still say it was conscious and aware. But I would call the baby has an awareness. That means its mind hasn't fixed on any individual objects. It means it's more expansive, and there's just, all these vibrations and colors and sounds coming through, but the mind isn't kind of fixing onto any one particular, and with judgments and with reactions. So that's what I would, when I'm using the term consciousness, I refer more to this consciousness of individual objects. Even the Buddha talked about it: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. Consciousness that usually has an object with it. So, in the practice of meditation, when you first start out to meditate, yes, there's the idea that I'm sitting here and I'm trying to concentrate on my breath, and I have these hindrances. So, the mind is dominated by the ego consciousness. Everything revolves around me and my problems and my hindrances, and I'm trying to do this, and that's bothering me, and all that. That's the typical, ordinary mind, or we call ego consciousness. But when you start meditating and you start developing deeper levels of mindfulness and concentration, and as you stop reacting to like itches and pains, and you start to get more focused, the mind's less reactive, and then if you're able to deepen that, comes a point where that feeling of I, gets weaker and weaker and starts to kind of recede into the background. Is no longer sort of dominant there and trying to control everything. There's more space within the consciousness. More space has been infused, you might say. More spaciousness, which is less reactive. And you can just observe an itch or a pain without that kind of struggling to get away from it. Or you're hearing sounds, it's just kind of just hearing and feeling, and even thoughts. Thoughts may come through the mind, but you're not identifying with them, and they just, arise up, last a moment, and pass away. And so there's much more spaciousness in the mind. So that's what I would call the beginning of awareness. It means has less dominant ego or I, me, and mine activity in it. There's more space. So therefore you can notice more things. You can notice many more things even simultaneously. Before, when you're reacting, you're usually reacting to one thing. And so you become oblivious to other things around you. You're caught up in your whatever, your thought, or reacting to that pain or that sound or that person, and you, because that attention is on one object, you lose awareness of other things around. But there's still plenty, hundreds and thousands of other objects and noises and sensations around, but you've kind of blotted them out because of your focused reaction on one particular one. So when that reaction stops, the mind recovers its natural state of awareness, because that's the natural state of the mind, is this more expansive, egoless awareness, present moment awareness, as opposed to ego-dominated past and future consciousness. That's the main qualitative difference between consciousness, at least the way I like to define it, and awareness that's free from the past and future grasping and discrimination and the ego struggling to react to. And so when that happens, you definitely notice that. When the mind gives up that struggling, when you've attained a certain level of concentration and awareness, it's almost immediate. It's very dramatic. And that's an empirical, direct experience of the metamorphosis of the consciousness from ego-dominated consciousness to more expanded present moment awareness. And it's very important to understand that, because when you understand that like makes a whole world of difference in your understanding and wisdom. And so the whole practice of vipassana and the four foundations of mindfulness is the training in aiding or allowing that process of that sort of transformation of consciousness to occur. Because the things that we're grasping on, we grasp to the body. We grasp our feelings, we grasp our perceptions, we grasp our reactions. And those are which keep the mind bottled up in its struggle with those objects of pleasure and pain. And so by learning to develop the mindfulness and concentration and the perception of impermanence, that short circuits the ordinary brain process. Actually, that's what happens. When you practice, develop mindfulness and concentration, you short circuit the old patterns, the habitual patterns of our thinking and reactions. It's just like flipping a switch, just like you'd flip a breaker switch and then the energy goes from these tracks over to another wire. So in the same way, that's what happens in meditation actually. You're short-circuiting the normal reactive patterns and entering into another dimension of awareness. And this is a definite experience that you can experience if you have enough patience and you do the practice and you know how to do the right kind of practice. That answer your question? Anything come off of that? I mean, once you get beyond the hindrances of sleepiness and fidgetiness and, kind of into that more centered and grounded in the body, then, it's a whole nother realm. And then meditation becomes very interesting. It becomes like a real experiment then, because you're seeing and experiencing different things, and so that brings a lot of joy and happiness to the mind when you start to get insights. But the problem is that initial dealing with those hindrances, as I mentioned, sleepiness, overcoming sleepiness is the absolute worst one. Sleepiness is the worst of the hindrances. Because with sleepiness you can't do anything. At least with pain you can observe pain, right? You can observe it, you can relax around it, you can tolerate it, so you can get some insights into pain. And the same with your thoughts. You can analyze your thoughts, you can get some insight into the thoughts, but with sleepiness it's a dead end. And so that's why being aware of the things that cause sleepiness is a very important part of sort of training oneself.
When you have too many thoughts, sometimes one day the meditation is good, and the next day there's too many thoughts. What would be your suggestion about, like, you can sit down for 40 minutes, but the only thing you get is thoughts in your head in all directions. So what would be your suggestion about, in addition of the breathing and feeling your body?
And analyze your thoughts. Try to sort of follow them, where they lead to. Or one leads to another, or they're just all scattered, fragmented things. And, see the quality of the thoughts. How many of those thoughts are connected with the, anger, or delusion, or greed, or attachment, or jealousy, or ego. These are the types of, when we say consciousness, we say a consciousness with greed, consciousness with hate, consciousness with delusion. This is actually the Chittanupassana. When you read the Satipatthana Sutta in Chittanupassana, that is what the meditator understands. A consciousness with greed is arisen now. A consciousness with hatred is arisen now. A consciousness with delusion is arisen now. A consciousness with a concentrated mind has arisen. Or a scatterbrained state of mind has arisen. And you understand, how do these states arise? How do they persist? And how do they cease? So that involves some analyzing, as I mentioned already in this part of the talk earlier. And so you can use thinking. That's the time when you have too many thoughts, and most of them are kind of just useless thoughts. Think about the Dhamma. Think about something that's interesting. You can't think of two things at the same time. So replace that kind of just wandering thinking or negative thinking with thinking about the Dhamma. But you have to know what to think about. And that's why having an intellectual understanding of the Dhamma is helpful. And that's part of the scheme of the three levels of wisdom. First is the intellectual level, where you get some understanding of the Dhamma by reading or hearing books, reading, and you get some intellectual understanding. But then you think about it. You sit down and think about it. And with that thinking, you can attain the first jhana, as I mentioned also in the talk today, vitakka and vichara, applied and sustained thought, which is thinking, but it's a limited thinking about a specific topic, a Dhamma topic. And because it's Dhamma, it brings joy into the mind. Because Dhamma is Dhamma, Dhamma is the truth, and when we contemplate it, we understand that yes, it is the truth. And that's what brings the joy with it. But there's no necessarily easy way to deal. And ultimately, of course, this mind and thoughts, it's all anatta. There's no one that can ultimately control it, but we can try to manage it. And but they're also impermanent, and they arise, and then eventually they'll change and cease. So sometimes you have a good meditation, sometimes you have a bad meditation, or so-called bad meditation, but we shouldn't try to label our meditations as good or bad, because then we get caught up in this dualistic judgments and so on. It is what it is. If the mind becomes concentrated and calm, there's reasons for that. And understand, okay, how does the mind become concentrated and calm? And if it becomes agitated, and understand, how does the mind become agitated? But knowing that both calmness and agitation are also impermanent, they arise because of conditions and they'll change. So to have patience and kind of wait it out, and it will change. But if you can always come back and just feel where the buttocks are pressing the floor, or where the feet are pressing the floor, that's what I call ground zero of the present moment. The mind can be all filled with fantasies and thoughts. And when that happens, just, place all of your attention just right there where that 50 or 70 kilos of flesh and bones is pressing the floor. If you're standing at your feet, if you're sitting at your buttocks, and just glue your mind to that. And that's the only thing that's real, is that sensation of that contact on the ground. Everything else is imagination or hallucination, including your thoughts, worries, and the past and future. The only thing that's really real as an empirical experience is that buttocks pressing the floor. That's called ground zero. And it's always available, either your feet, unless you can levitate. There's never a time when either your feet or your buttocks or at least some part of the body is pressing the floor. And you should train yourself to have that instinct to come to that point anytime the mind starts getting agitated, to bring it to that point. It's like that anchor. And holding on to that until the waves of whatever agitations and so on pass off.
It seems like we understand some of these concepts theoretically. There is nothing other than five perceptions that we have. We create names and images. And also we know there is an ego, I and me. But that's not true. Theoretically we understand that. By doing meditation, what else we gonna get?
What else you want?
Don't know. What revelation that? Can you describe it, or?
I think I was describing it just some minutes ago when I talk about you directly experience that shift from ego consciousness to that more expansive present moment awareness. That's what you get. And that's all you need. You don't need anything else.
Along the lines that you're saying, Bhante, and what you first said, the ego, it has to be, the ego actually has to experience that it cannot go any further than its instruction, that it's impermanence or whatever, and it does, but the traveler, the meditator has to see it in a sympathetic way, though. Even though that's also a condition. In order to go into the higher consciousness, the ego can't go there, and you're not going to go there if you don't understand the nature of the ego. That's the way I'm interpreting what you're saying, Bhante.
The ego exists only because of desire. And that desire has an object. Whether it's the desire for I want to get enlightened, or it's the desire for any of the six sense objects in the mind. And as long as there's that desire, then there'll be the ego that's the object of that desire. So the Desire and ego are like two sides of a coin. You can't have one without the other. And actually, desire is projected ego. Because the ego has to have desire to exist. The moment you stop desiring something, in fact, the sense of I starts fading away. Because they depend on each other. And that's why in meditation, we train ourselves to gradually let go of the various sensory objects and that attachment or aversion to them. And as you do that, the sense of self gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and you can directly observe that experience. And there's many, many degrees of that. So understanding that, that's why you can't get rid of desire. The ego cannot get rid of desire. As long as you have a strong ego, it's impossible to get rid of desire. You might give up one desire or two desires, but that same energy, goes around the corner and picks up onto another desire. So the ego cannot give up desire. But you can understand desire. When you understand the mechanism of desire and how it creates and sustains the ego and brings along with it all the attendant suffering, worry, confusion, fear, then in that understanding of the desire is the letting go of it. So that way it happens through wisdom, not by forcing. And that's why understanding the nature of suffering is, the noble truth. And understand the cause of suffering, which is exactly what I just mentioned, the ego and desire. And it started at the time of the baby, when it got that first sweet sensation. And the desire was born. I want that pleasurable taste again. Or some other sensation. Then the future was born in the mind. And so when you really understand that process, then it's much easier to start then weakening the foundations of that delusion. And to experience the happiness that comes from that, actually the state of non-desiring. And again, this is really the kind of like the deep Dhamma, the real essence of Dhamma and understanding. And it's not easy because of the depth of ignorance that's entrenched in the subconscious mind, in the nervous system. But it can be done. It certainly can be done. But you need to know the steps. And the steps is the Noble Eightfold Path. The path of regular steps. Is there another question back there?
Bhante, so you're talking about the path, noble path. So mindfulness is like just like one part of that path, isn't it? So sati, samma sati. So what about the other ones?
Those are supports for mindfulness. Actually, in the Noble Eightfold Path, and I may actually talk about that tomorrow in the Dhamma talk. But in the Buddhist teaching, there's only one sutta that the Buddha states, this is the direct way, the direct path that leads to the overcoming of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, abolishment of ignorance, and the arising of wisdom. And that's the four foundations of mindfulness. But in order to practice the four foundations of mindfulness without the supports of right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right mindful, livelihood and effort, that mindfulness isn't going to be strong enough to cultivate to the deepest levels. And even concentration, he didn't say, he didn't say that about concentration, but the right mindfulness leads to the right concentration. Anyway, understanding the Dhamma takes a lot of study, and only through the practice of meditation that intellectual understanding becomes more clear.
So when you said like concentration, Bhante, so if the concentration that you are talking about, like the samadhi, is it the ability to concentrate on or holding on to living in the right in this particular moment? Is that what you are saying? Like keep on.
Well, there's different interpretations about the right concentration, and concentration means not being distracted, and it doesn't necessarily mean your mind is fully absorbed in one object and becomes oblivious of everything else around you. Now, you can do that. You can develop that kind of concentration, like the formless jhanas. If you developed, to the extent of the formless jhanas, you could be absorbed in the concept of infinite space, and if you died in that state, you could be reborn and stay there for 50,000 eons of time in one point, in just a perpetual experience of infinite space. Now, if you want that, go for it, but that's not the path to enlightenment. So, right concentration has the supports of all the rest of the Eightfold Path with it. And the right concentration is at the end, not at the beginning of the Eightfold Path. But it means the mind that's resting in the present moment, whether you have an object in that present moment or no object. The present moment doesn't need an object. The present moment is just the present moment. It's not necessarily focused on anything except the experience of the present moment, awareness. So the mindfulness leads by practicing mindfulness, you automatically gain concentration. But not a concentration that's fixed on just one object. It's the present moment awareness. The hindrances have been subsided. And in that present moment awareness, then that's where wisdom arises. One who is concentrated sees reality as it is, as impermanent and without self.
Bhante, this process of, getting rid of, letting go the things and getting rid of this ego is completely, it goes together with our meditation, in our daily life. I just want to make sure that this is correct, that is together, right? Because through meditation, there is more clarity, and somehow we get a little more wisdom. But in the practice of the actual life, in our daily life, work and everything else, is where we can, in a way, apply the wisdom that we gain through meditation. So is that correct? That this is how I feel it is? Do you think that this is correct?
In our daily life, if we get into a situation when we see our ego starting to grasp or make judgments, we can bring our understanding to bear and say,
Yeah.
this is the ego now, trying to reinforce itself. And so that's how it then helps you to back off of that, kind of let go of that clinging tightly to one's opinion, or you're getting in an argument with somebody or something over just something, just let go of that struggling, or let go of that wanting to get angry back at somebody, or anything else that's causing the ego to grasp. You have to recognize it, grasping ego, and then understand the danger in that, and to let go of that.
So all of these weaken, all of these kind of attachments and defilements that we have, the more wisdom we apply in our daily life, it is that way.
Yeah, we have to apply it in the daily life. What you get in meditation is just a training. Then that has to be taken out and applied in the daily life, because that's where you're creating karma. Is out there on the street, or in your office, or in your house, where you're encountering situations with your other family members, or just strangers, or in the supermarket, or anywhere else where there's, could be some, contact with others, or contemplations, or differences. And that's when we have to have our wisdom on instant Google search. Have to instantly apply it.
But would you say that this is at the same time, in a way, reprogramming in our brain? Because if the things are so ingrained in our brain already, that we go back to the things.
That's reprogramming. That's right. Meditation is reprogramming the brain. As I said, we have to, you short circuit the old negative patterns, and you create a new, more wholesome patterns. But if you can't do it while you're meditating in a safe environment, such as a meditation hall or in your home, there's very likely any chance you're going to be able to do it out there on the street when sudden things happen all of a sudden and in chaotic situations. So meditation is a training, and if you can apply it effectively in meditation, then when you are out in the not necessarily meditating in daily life, that will be more available to you to use.
Meditation is pretty sure it's actually for the future.
Yeah, I think we'll bring this discussion to an end because it'll never stop otherwise, and we want to do our meditation. So we'll go ahead and just take a deep breath. Try to bring your mind back to the body.